public hearing will begin at 9:18. And we will go to item number 1, a presentation by District Legal Counsel, Mr. Sledge.
Did we have roll call?
No.
Oh.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sinclair, you call roll, please.
Yes. Okay, Director Becedo,
Here.
Director Kirk,
Here.
Director Osborne,
Here.
Director Tischler,
Here.
Director McPherson,
Here.
Director Smith,
Here.
Director Curtis,
Do you have him muted?
no,
John? John? He was available. I'm sure he might have stepped away. I'll text him to let me know when he rejoins.
We heard his voice.
we did.
Okay. Now, Mr. Sledge.
Thank you, Mr. President, board members, members of the public. This is a rulemaking hearing that we discussed for amendments to the district rules that we discussed last month at the board meeting. I'll say at the outset that some jurisdictional matters that the district did provide notice of this rulemaking hearing as required by Chapter 36 of the Water Code, which included newspaper publication. Also,
I'm here.
Okay, there's John. Thank you.
little
I'm here.
Connection there.
Hello?
Can you
Hello.
hear us, John?
Hello?
Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Also, we've had copies of the proposed amendments to the rules available on the district's website and from the district office, and anybody that requested them at least 20 days prior to this hearing as required by law. I'm going to hit the highlights of the rules changes, and as we always discuss when we talk about the district rules, it's a living document, and as we implement things, we see things that unanticipated events that need clarification on how they apply to the rules, and things change, and we kind of consistently want to update them to make them better and work for the folks that have to comply with them. And so there's a number of small technical changes and typographical corrections that we've noted, but I'm going to hit the main highlights of them here. The first one is clarifying under the rules that in Rule 310 and Rule 511 that well owners will no longer under a historic use permit be limited. Well owners that have multiple wells that are part of a well system, we're no longer going to regulate the production of the individual wells based on the maximum historic use of those individual wells. Instead, now we will focus in well systems solely on the maximum historic use for the system. That'll provide greater regulatory flexibility for well owners or well system owners that have multiple wells to be able to move water around within their wells as necessary based on which wells are working, which aren't, what pressure plane they're in. And from an administrative standpoint, this really came to light from the district staff working on review of historic use permit applications. It's just going to be real tough to administer internally, and we don't think that we think it's going to cause a lot of enforcement problems for our well system owners. It's tough enough for them, we think, going from a situation where they have to monitor their production in the system so that they don't exceed their permit limit on an annual basis. But trying to do that for each individual well in some of these systems which have so many wells, we just think it's going to be unmanageable and lead to a lot of inadvertent rules violations. We still want to be able to manage the aquifers, knowing where production's actually occurring from which wells in the system. And we'll still be able to do that because those folks will still have to turn in their groundwater production reports indicating how much was produced from each well in the system. And so we'll still be able to do that. But they will have that flexibility to shift production between wells in their system, even if it happens to cause an exceedance of one individual well's maximum historic use. They have to be able to, if they shift production among wells in the system, they still have to be able to do that based on whatever the instantaneous capacity of the wells are as is. If they were required to go in and rework a well to increase its capacity, or to add a new well to shift that historic use permit production authority between wells, they would have to comply with the spacing rules of the district. And for impacts to neighboring landowners, it's the instantaneous production capacity of the well that's the driving force on the water well drawdowns in the vicinity of the well, and so that'll still be protected. And so the Rules and Bylaws Committee thought this was a good change, and that's represented in these communities. We also we have a clarification in Rule 4.3, our well spacing rules, our minimum distance for well spacing. We have a clarification that applicants for a well, a new well going in that has to comply with spacing regulations, can utilize the values for the hydraulic properties of the aquifer, either from the Northern Trinity Woodbine groundwater availability model, or from actual real world test data from another well within 1 mile of the system. We also are going to require the general manager, who no doubt will lean on Mr. Beach to help her with this exercise, develop a guidance document for how to make the well spacing calculations under the Coopers-Jacobs formula, the big square root formula that's in the rules, giving a few examples of how you could do that in a way that will be acceptable to the district. As we recall from a couple of months back, we've had some applications, our first under those rules, where there just seemed to be a disconnect between the applicant and their consultants, and the general manager and the district's hydrogeologist on exactly how to make those well calculations. And so we think a guidance document will help clarify that. We clarify some of the language and the definition of maximum historic use, and also in Rule 3.8, related to these wells that got caught, new wells, or at least new at the time that the district was transitioning from an unregulated, or at least no permit requirements, into our permit requirements under maximum historic use. You'll recall that we have a provision that says if a well wasn't drilled until the very last year of the historic period, so that it doesn't have a full year's worth of production to declare under the historic use rules, that they can extrapolate out their production on what they would have produced in the full year. Some wells that still get caught are, for example, a well that went in 1 year prior to the last year of the historic use period, but that hadn't reached its full intended production amount for a year. And the easiest example is a well that's been put in to supply water for example, a 200-unit subdivision. In 2018, the last year of the historic use period, let's say just 10 homes have been built. Well, they did have a full year of production, so they wouldn't qualify under that definition, but they hadn't produced the full amount for the intended purpose of the well, which was 200 unit thing. So if they got evidence, and the rules require that they have planning and design documents to show that we put in this well for, under that example, a 200 unit subdivision, we just hadn't reached it yet, they'll be able to extrapolate out and claim that full amount. we make that clear in both of those sections of the rules. Another issue we've discussed is well spacing exception applications under Rule 4.7. For exempt wells, we've talked about if you come in for an exception application for a well that requires a permit, you can, if somebody wants to contest that application, they just contest it in conjunction with contesting the permit at the permit hearing. But if it's a non-exempt well that comes in and say somebody wants to sink a big agricultural well down on the edge of your property, because that doesn't require a permit, there's not a permit hearing at which a neighboring landowner can contest that. So we clarify that the contested case hearings procedures in Rule 10 also could apply to somebody in a situation like that that wanted to contest a well that was seeking an exception going in too close to their property for wells that don't require that. Under the change of ownership provisions, we've had a situation come up where we had a public water system that was unable to supply water to its citizens. It's interconnected to a neighboring system next door. And the question is, could the neighboring system next door utilize the Historic Use Production Authority for the original system in order to serve its constituents? And we didn't really have any provision that addressed that. So we put a provision in here that would specifically allow that to happen. That being that, historic use permits under the Supreme Court opinions, you have to be the same historical purpose if you were to transfer a permit. And that's a situation where somebody would clearly be still serving the same historical purpose. I'm stepping into your shoes to help serve your citizens while you're unable to do so, either on a permanent or temporary basis. So we allow them to transfer that production. We have a number of changes based on some discounts that were adopted when the district was first up and running and trying to get fees in the door. Our early payment incentive, where folks are get a slight discount on their water use fees for paying early. We also have an exemption of up to 3% for water use for TCEQ required line flushing or for emergency services. As we move now in the new calendar year to paying based on the permitted amount rather than actual production, everybody's paying in advance on the permitted amount. And we have the new provision that's going to kick in next year that says that at the end of the year, you can get a refund of up to 20% of your permitted amount if you conserve that water for whatever purpose. And so the proposed rules change eliminates those exemptions for early payment incentives, TCEQ line flushing, emergency services in favor of the approach under the new rule, which will allow the refund at the end of the year of up to 20% of water that you don't use. In section 7, we have all through section 7, we have heretofore delineated each and every application fee of every kind and every other administrative fee that we assess by rule. And after visiting with the general manager and the rules committee about that, we're going to take all of those specific fees out of the rules and just have the board adopt those fees by resolution once a year. That'll save public funds because it's expensive to go through a rulemaking hearing and to go in and amend the rules every time you want to change one of those amounts. And so by having the board just be able to adopt those on an annual basis, that'll still be a public process. People will still be able to comment on that. But every time a fee changes, we won't have to go in and do a full-blown rules amendment. Finally, on our meter accuracy under section 8, we're moving that to coincide with permit terms. So that every 5 years, which will be our standard permit terms for historic use permits and operating permits, each well owner or well system owner will have to go in and get a certificate of verifying the accuracy of their meters to record the flow of water once during their permit term prior to it coming up and being renewed. We still have the provision that the general manager can require that at any time if there's a reason to suspect that the meter's not reading accurately. But we also updated the accuracy standard to the industry standard, which is an accuracy measuring plus or minus 1.5%. So a range of 98.5 to 101.5 for meter accuracy will be the standard by which we judge whether those things are accurately reporting groundwater production. As I said at the outset, there's a number of other little small word changes here and there, but that's the bulk of the changes that are set forth in these rules. I'd be happy to answer any questions from the board, or if we've got anybody signed up to make public comments.
So, I would like to remind our public that may be on by Zoom that if you will raise your hand, staff will recognize you for any public comments. We can unmute you at that time. And we apologize for the technical difficulties of not being able to show on the displays. So Sinclair, do we have anyone? Raise their hand or in the chat feature?
No.
I'm raising my hand.
Okay, and this is, if you'll,
This is John Curtis.
okay, John.
I misunderstood why I was raising my hand. I apologize. I didn't have a question.
Do you have public comment on the rules?
No, I misunderstood what you were asking.
Okay. It's definitely a learning curve today for everyone.
Okay. If we have any other comments at this time, I'll go on and this item number 3, discuss consideration of possible action adopting resolution number 20-008, approving amendments to the district rules for groundwater well, Ellis, Hill, Johnson, and Somerville counties, Texas, in the form originally published or with changes based upon comment received today. All those in favor?
We don't have a motion yet.
I'll make a motion.
I'm in favor, John Curtis.
Okay. Motion made and seconded on
Resolution
resolution 20-008. Motion and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye from John Curtis.
Thank you, John. All motion passed. Now adjourn our hearing. Motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Have a motion, there a second. Motion made and seconded to adjourn the public hearing. Thank you. Yes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed. Motion carried. Public hearing is now adjourned at 9:37. Here we go. We will now call the Fairlands Groundwater Conservation District regular board meeting to order. Fairlands GCD Board of Directors may discuss, consider, and take all necessary action including possible expenditures earned regarding each of its financial.
Is that the?
Yes. Director Beseda,
Here.
Director Kurt,
Here.
Director Osborne,
Here.
Director Tischler,
Yes.
Director McPherson,
Here.
Director Smith,
Here.
Director Curtis.
Here,
We have a quorum present.
Thank you. Move on to
Liz, do you have earbuds?
we have any public comments?
No.
Again, I would encourage anyone wishing to have public comment that's present by Zoom to please raise your hand or message in the chat feature.
We have nothing. No public comments.
One item on the floor, consent agenda. All items are considered routine and self-explanatory and may be considered and approved by the motion board. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless the board member so declares. Which is that the item will be removed from the consent agenda and considered in this morning. Okay.
Since I can't pull this up on here, do we have a payment in the deal for Texas? Is it on-
No, they're under a service agreement. So,
So there's nothing in
No,
there
sir.
that we would approving any payment to them.
no, sir.
Okay. I'll entertain the consent agenda.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion and second that we approve our consent agenda. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed,
Hi, John Curtis.
motion carried. Thank you. And move on to item number 5, administrative and financial.
Yes, thank you. And I have a couple of items to brief the board on. First, just a little brief update on staff. Rosetta Doffett, or Doffett, probably mispronounced that again, actually fell Tuesday morning early and broke her hip and her wrist. And so she is unfortunately out of the office for several weeks as she recuperates on that, but is asked that, everyone keep her in your prayers. She's home now and beginning physical therapy today. So, and following that, one of the things we discussed at the last meeting is that staff needed to send out payment notice letters to all of our applicants and permit holders. So following our meeting last month, the staff mailed out these notices of payment options to all the permit holders and as well as the historic use permit applicants. And it advised them that actually reminding them that beginning January 1st, 2021, the fee payment structure for water use fees for non-exempt wells allow the option to prepay annually or submit quarterly or monthly payments fees for the maximum annual groundwater claimed in their historic use permit are approved under their operating permit. Included with this notice was a reminder that beginning January 1st of that same year will also mark the beginning of the requirement for monthly submission of water production reports as well as meter readings and meter logs for non-exempt wells. Per the district rules, final invoices are scheduled to go out today, 45 days before year end. And I did have staff pull the number, and let me get that email. I totally forgot to drop it in. We have Carol here in the audience. Carol, do you know offhand the numbers on how many invoices were generated that were annual versus the monthly?
We did a total of 250 invoices, 147 were annual, 78 were quarterly, and I believe 25 were monthly.
So those will be going out today. We did work this weekend with Rosetta being out, managing to get those invoices out, but it was fairly simple and, I was quite proud of myself and staff for being able to get that done. So the panic that we all had last week was not necessary. So we'll be modifying things around here to bring in a temp for bookkeeping until we have more information and just move forward. So does anyone have any questions on any of that? If not, that would be my update.
Okay.
I received the email from y'all, for my employer, and everything was great. Well done.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
We will move on to item number 6, the Budget and Finance Committee report.
We'll do that. So the Budget and Finance Committee has met on several occasions and has worked diligently to identify all reasonably anticipated district revenues, expenses, and activities for January 1, 2021 through December 31st of 2021 budget cycle. And after giving much consideration to these important factors, has developed the proposed budget presented to you today in the board packet for consideration. The proposed budget is expanded to include receipt of proposed administrative fees and the collection of merchant processing fees now for credit card payments, as well as surcharges associated with monthly payments. It also takes into consideration ending the early payment incentive for water use fees that was established during the temporary rules, as well as water use payment exemptions for certain flushing requirements in favor of an annual refund on conserved water for conserved water under a permit. And with that, a copy of the budget begins on page 224 of your packet. If anyone has questions regarding items of interest, me or someone of the budget committee will be glad to discuss or address that or answer the questions. If there's no questions, based on the recommendation of the budget committee, it would be my recommendation to approve this budget as presented.
We need to approve resolution 20-009.
Yes, sir.
I so move.
Okay.
Motion made and seconded that we approve resolution 2009, reviewing and adopting the 1-year 2021 operating budget and authorizing general manager to take any and all actions necessary for implementation of this resolution. Those in favor say aye.
Aye, John Curtis.
Motion carried.
The next item is consider establishing the administrative fee schedule. So following adoption of today's rule, the board authorized establishing certain administrative fees that were previously set forth in the district rules. This provides the board a more practical and less costly use of public funds, as Brian mentioned earlier, without the expense of having a rules hearing every time we needed to amend administrative fee amount. The Budget and Finance Committee did meet on November the 3rd to review the proposed administrative fee schedule included in your packet on page 231. This was sent out in your packet on Friday. Unless there are questions regarding any of these proposed fees, it would be my recommendation to approve.
Okay.
If there's no discussion, I move to approve resolution 20-010.
Second. Motion made and seconded that we consider resolution motion to, resolution 20-0110, establish administrative fee schedule and authorize the general manager to take all and necessary actions for implementing of this resolution. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. John Curtis.
Motion carried. Okay, we'll move on to item number 7. Available public outreach. Clerk.
Charles, can you turn up your mic any, because they're having trouble hearing you.
Good morning. Just a few updates with some education and PR initiatives. The fall 2020 edition of our Prairie Lands E-Line newsletter was released on October 30th. And it includes several articles, some about conserving water during this fall season, a in-depth article about how GCDs participate in joint planning, some of the initiatives and activities of GMA 8, highlighting some of the new staff, and a feature on Dennis and the open house and the recognition of him and his service to the district. I also included copies at each of your seats of our new district brochure that were developed and printed. It was definitely time for a new brochure, not only because we have a new office and our address changed, but with the adoption of our permanent rules and several of the strides that we've made within the last 2 years. It was time to have some new literature for these education outreach events. So I encourage you to look through those and provide me feedback if you'd like. Also, I mentioned at the last meeting that we were working on some educational signage for our rainwater system. I encourage you, before you leave today, we did have our sign come in, and it is outside next to our rainwater cistern. So it features some facts and information about that system, the size, the purpose. So as part of events and education activities that we have here, or even just the public who comes to our front parking lot, they're just coming in to submit paperwork or have a meeting, but that sign is out front to serve as an educational tool. I gave a presentation to Fossil Rim Wildlife Center staff on November 4th, just to promote the district, tell them more about who we are and what we do. Sometimes we find that it might just be the manager or the director and maybe the bookkeeper of an organization that, they work with us very closely. So this was a great opportunity to visit with many different faces of that Fossil Rim Wildlife Center out there. And they are really wanting to get into more conservation efforts, rainwater harvesting, native plants and landscaping. And they are kind of in a unusual time right now because of COVID. They've had to significantly reduce their staff. So they're kind of seeing the effects of that as well. But it was a great opportunity to meet with them and promote the district and visit with them. And they definitely are open to conservation projects in the future once things kind of get back to normal for them. I also want to talk about a meeting I had with Ms. Ali Tello. She is the coordinator of events and community relations with Hill College, the campus here on the west side of Cleburne. And she came by the office and toured the water education trailer, toured our office, learned more about us. And she wants to work with us on partnering for educational programs, whether it be with classes that are being taught there, or several of the events that they have. So just a good connection there within the community. And then she came by and visited with us. So looking forward to seeing what comes from that. A few more upcoming events. This week, the Ovilla Garden Club, they were scheduled to come here to the office. And the end of last week, I received an email that they are considering potentially having a virtual presentation just because everything going on with COVID, and they want to have the most amount of participation with their members. So they were going to try to give me a final decision, hopefully today or tomorrow, so we know where to go from there. And then also some water education trailer events and demonstrations. we're starting to schedule those for the spring. And I have to be determined on there because these schools in some cases are going kind of on what they know week by week with what's going on. So schools are changing policies. And so I have several schools that know that they want events, they want these demonstrations. And they're being hopeful that come spring, they'll have a little more stability, but those relationships and those connections and that communication is there with these schools. So I'm working on keeping that in touch with them and letting them know that we're here to work with them and accommodate them. And then as always, I include our some information on our social media and digital platforms. And I would love to entertain any questions or comments at this time. Hey, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to item A, stormwater management area update activities. Sometimes absent. Kathy.
Yes, I prepared that for you. So I set him in as the alternate for Prairie Lands at the GMA 8 meeting on, we had that, what's that mean? It was recently, but anyway, part of it was discussing proposed CFCs for adoption by the GMA 8 planning group. And as many of you are aware, May 1st of this year is the GMA is required to adopt proposed CFCs, considering groundwater availability models and other data or information for the management area. The DFCs that the GMA 8 has been working on and developed is with, excuse me, my notes got out of order here. The DFCs proposed by the GMA are required to provide a balance between the highest and practical level of groundwater production and the conservation, preservation, and protection, recharging, and prevention of waste of groundwater to control subsidence and other waste of groundwater and control of subsidence in the management area. After developing these proposed DFCs, the planning group representatives held their meeting, and it was October the 27th. And at that time, he unanimously approved the proposed DFCs for public comment and hearing. With that, before we go on kind of what's next, I've asked James Beach to give a highlight of those proposed CFCs for Prairie Lands that we've had presented at previous meetings, but just for everyone's continued review and knowledge, I've asked him. And again, I apologize that we don't have access to a screen, but I've asked James to follow our board packet. And if you look on page 298, there is copies of those tables with the proposed draft or proposed adopted DFCs. James, are you available?
Yes, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so as Kathy said, page 298, most of y'all are very familiar with the process that we've been talking about for a couple of years now. All of the districts have made modifications or had the opportunity to make modifications to their input into the DFC process. Some of the districts have made changes to their pumping projections into the future. Excuse me. And that has modified some of the DFCs. Y'all have all been aware of that and have seen those changes. If you look on page 298, excuse me. If you look on page 298, you'll see the summary of those changes for all of the aquifers in GMA 8 and then also by district in GMA 8. And you can see at the bottom of page 298, each one of the expected drawdown estimates in 2080 for Prairie Lands. And then if you wanted to go and look by county, you could see that in table 4 starting on page 299. And so, again, none of this is new. This is all the adopted or proposed adopted DFCs that were agreed to at the last meeting. Today, GMA 8 has finalized the signatures that were needed by each district to mail those out. And so it starts the 90-day period. That email just came out from GMA 8 this morning. And so that starts a 90-day window whereby you need to have a hearing. And I'm sure Kathy and Brian will be working on that and scheduling that for you. I'll take any questions if y'all have any.
So James, just from my knowledge, does that 90 days start today? Is today the day they received it?
Yes, that's my understanding.
So I had a PowerPoint presentation to show everyone kind of what's kind of expected during this 90 days. But as he mentioned, now that we have that signature page, these DFCs will be mailed out to the individual districts, which then that starts the 90-day clock. And during for public comment, once that 90 days is up, we must hold that public hearing, take public comment, and then compile a summary of these comments for our explanatory report and potential revisions to any DFCs if there might be any. Brian, do you have anything you want to expand on that?
That's pretty much the process.
Again, this process is scheduled to be completed by January 5th of 2022. So we're hoping to be getting back together as a GMA in June. Is that still correct, James, or has that been moved out a month since the signature pages?
It'll be after that 90-day period, and we actually are ahead of schedule at GMA 8 and have adopted, adopted proposed DFCs 3 or 4 months ahead of time. And so after each of the districts has their hearing, then we'll come back together and move on to the next step of making that official and submitting those DFCs to the Water Development Board, along with all the modeling files and everything else, to ask the executive administrator to calculate MAGs, et cetera.
Okay. So again, I apologize we didn't have a presentation to step you through it, but be glad to answer any questions after the meeting if there's still some.
Can I ask James a question? Hey, James, this is Paul. The average, so the GMA 8 adopted DFCs on the GCD scale. And it says it's based on the total average speed of drawdown, both confined and unconfined. Is that average based on per county or per square foot, per square mile? In other words, what's the averaging factor of that?
So are you talking about, I'm sorry, table 1 or table 2, by district or by aquifer?
All right, table 2.
Table 2. That's just basically across the confined, unconfined, everything in the aquifer. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. So it's using the zones instead of county boundaries.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I understand.
If you recall, that's a good question and a good reminder, maybe for those who are new to the process. In the last round of planning, there was a debate, and I think there's still a debate. Maybe Mr. Sledge wants to comment, but there is a debate about how DFCs should be monitored, how they should be enforced, and Chapter 36 leaves flexibility for that potentially. And so the wisdom of the group in the last round of planning was to present the DFCs in multiple ways. The first one was, as you see in table 1, by aquifer, and then table 2 is by district, and then table 3 is by aquifer and county. And so the presentation of the DFCs in this fashion allows districts the freedom to implement those as they will, and and that will hopefully cover whatever is needed by each, local district to manage under their rules and management plan. Just to go back, Paul, to the genesis of those tables and how those got folded into our proposed DFCs. Thank you.
Yes, I understand now. Thank you.
Okay, is there any other questions?
And it's, no action is necessary unless there is something outside of what might be, there's this briefing on this.
Thank you, Kathy. James, move on to item number 9, general manager's report.
Okay. Excuse me? Thank you. So my manager's report is included in your packet on page 303. A couple of things, and I'm sure Brian will discuss this in greater detail in a moment, but the legislative session is upon us and pre-filing of bills has already begun. That kicked off November the 9th, and session will convene for the 87th session, actually, on January the 12th. 2 key bills have already been filed that I'm aware of. Senator Perry has filed Senate Bill 152 related to regulation of groundwater conservation districts. That's really no surprise. 3 topics covered under there that are of real interest to us, potentially is attorney fees, petition for rulemaking, and notice to affected landowners. PWCA's groundwater committee is following this pretty aggressively, and we feel confident at this time that we can reach some consensus language that hopefully will be incorporated into the final bill. I believe Farm Bureau is who filed the draft bill, or gave the draft bill to the committee, but Farm Bureau is also acknowledged that they are receptive to consensus language and will help work to incorporate that. The other bill is House Bill 271 by Murr related to procedures for state agencies on navigable water courses. It just hit the radar as something, it's not really applicable to groundwater districts, but it is an interesting bill. There is a House State Affairs Committee meeting on Wednesday regarding taxpayer funded lobbying, which I think will keep our eye on to ensure that, we have the ability to have resources and options needed. So with that, we do include year-to-date water usage numbers. You'll see that in the report. Gallons reported again are not final, but through October, based on reporting that doesn't include semi-annual for this last half, is 4.9 billion gallons. We've had a little less well drilling in the last month. We went down from 20-something wells to 11 in the 4 counties. Again, Johnson County leads the pack with 6 of those being in Johnson County. Our field operation report, as you can see, Michael has included information on details going on in the county. I have to give it to Michael. They're staying aggressively busy out there working on these historic use permit applications, helping our public find the resources that they need to complete their administrative review of these applications. There's just a lot of cleanup that's having to go on, and overall, most of the applicants are very receptive to this process and appreciate the assistance we're giving. we are hearing more and more from the public on potential operating permits coming up. So I think once the new year is here, we'll have several operating permits for board consideration. I've also included travel and meetings, which travel really doesn't exist anymore in this day of COVID, but there's a lot of Zoom meeting participation, which I know we're all facing Zoom fatigue. I am for one, and I think it's given an opportunity for more meetings instead of less because of the ease of scheduling, because they find you have extra windows that you're not in the car, so they schedule a meeting. But we're staying very busy. We're even scheduled one applicant that's out of the Austin area. He will be meeting with us by Zoom versus the 2.5-hour drive to here to complete some of his administrative, needs for the district. A lot of it's, asking questions, helping him understand the process so he can find the right documents or, provide the answers that we're still needing. Some of the public water systems that have met with us recently, they're, now that they're realizing the historic use permit application process and looking at their future demand, they're having questions how they move forward to still meet TCEQ's requirement on availability, but, if a permit limits them on something, does that put them in non-compliance with TCEQ? And assuring it does not. TCEQ still looks at well capacity, and if they have well capacity, that shouldn't be an issue, but, also discussing how to go about filing operating permits for additional water demand. Should they not have the flexibility to amend that HUP right now to include that any extrapolated amounts that they might qualify for? There's not really many upcoming events coming up besides an office closures for the holidays. While it seems to be a slow time for some, maybe this is a very busy time for the groundwater district, given that invoices go out today. Phones will be ringing. They have been aggressively ringing. We hit a glitch last week, I believe. AT&T finally moved our numbers over from the other building. They had been forwarding, and somehow it dropped where we only had, in the process, there was one whole day the phones didn't ring. It was kind of nice, but we had to put up an emergency number on the website. And then when they got that fixed, they forgot to put the rollover in, and so only one line would ring. So we've had a lot of, unintended glitches, but we've worked through them. And, I kept telling them, just be glad if I stop ringing the wall. But we've got that fixed. We're back to having a fax machine. And, a lot of people are like, I can't believe we still have a fax machine in 2020. But a lot of our public, that is their technology. And so we try to accommodate all. I have included a couple of violation enforcement items. Some of these have been updated since I included it in the packet. Both of these have made some payment, but not paid late fees. And so, this is with staff this morning. They're going to get with me today about next step actions. We should have included them as an actual enforcement item on the agenda, but, one of them just doesn't want to pay his late fees, even though he's very late. One did not have actual pumpage, but didn't ever report that. So we may, there's different things we need to look at on that, but I think now they're aware we need to have these conversations. So it's going into these meetings that y'all can have, real-time information on that. So with that, does anybody have any questions? We've also included the drought monitor report for the month. I always call it the crystal ball, but I'd be glad to answer any questions if anyone has any. And if not,
Ryan, is Perry picking up where that off last session? Is that what this is? Or is he starting with something new?
use your mic.
Well, it's a mixed bag. These are just the three stated water policy goals from the Farm Bureau, all rolled into one bill.
Well, it's a carryover, really.
Well, it's not exactly. He didn't file. Two of these are carryovers, but different versions that are a little more workable. The way they were last year.
If no other questions, that would be my report.
Thank you very much, Ken. Item 10. We will now go into executive session at 10:13 a.m. Board will recess and close executive session, consult with legal counsel on item on today's agenda under section 551.071 Government Code. No action will be taken in the closed session. At the conclusion of the closed session, the board will reconvene in open session. Thank you.
All mics off.
Okay, we're in the board will reconvene at 10:44 a.m. We're reconvening in open session and because we'll.
I don't have anything further. Mr. President.
Okay, thank you very much. Move on to item number 11, open forum, the discussion of new business with future meeting agendas. Anybody have anything?
Is Steve still with us?
Nothing.
He's still on here.
Muted.
Yes, I'm here. I couldn't hear Charles.
Okay, can you hear me?
I got you. Yep.
Hey, I want to circle back and just, and I know I've been a part of those committee meetings. I just want to make sure I understand it in my brain on those tables I asked you about. Can I ask you about that one more time?
Sure.
Everyone's enthusiastic.
Absolutely. Please do.
That's the beach we love. All right, so I want to make sure I understand the process in the three presentations. I remember the discussions on the three presentations. But if you take table 2,
On what page?
page 298. And if you look at Freeland's GCD on Travis Peak, so the adopted scale, the GCD scale is 323 feet for the Travis Peak.
Yes.
All right, the table above it, the Travis Peak for the for wide scale is 207 feet.
Okay.
All right, so on the next table, which is the county scale, if you take our 4 counties and add them up, divide by 4, it comes to 261. So is the county scale, is it proportional to, you know, why is it so far lower than either by GCD or by Oxford? Well, it's not lower than Oxford wide, but it's in the middle between the Oxford wide and the GCD. Can you explain that so I understand that better? It's just a wide range, and that's if I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just saying I don't understand how
Yeah.
I just want to know the process better.
Yeah. So it's a weighted average given the number of grid blocks in the Travis Peak in each one of those counties, and then in each one of those in the whole district, and then across all of GMA 8. And so unless there were the exact same number of grid blocks in each county, the straight average doesn't work to calculate the numbers.
And Somerville is so much smaller than that 64 feet. Somerville doesn't carry as much weight as the 380 and else.
Correct.
I understand now. Perfect.
Thanks.
Thank you, James. Thank you, James.
You're welcome.
Okay. If not, if you don't have any other questions, we'll move on to entertain item number 12 and adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion made and seconded, we adjourn this grand conservation meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye, John Curtis.
Thank you, John. This motion now carries. You are now adjourned.
Adios, everybody.
Thank you, guys.